The young black girl's eyes filled with tears as a flight attendant towered over her. "This seat isn't for you," she said coldly. "Get up, Mrs. Harrington needs this seat now." The 8-year-old clutched her boarding pass, trying to explain, but no one listened. The white woman standing in the aisle smiled triumphantly as passengers around them nodded in agreement. One man whispered, "Kids don't belong in first class anyway." This wasn't just about a seat. This was about money, power, and prejudice. This story began with Zoe Williams, a bright young black girl with a boarding pass for seat 2A, a first-class ticket purchased by her father. What Zoe didn't know was that her father wasn't just any businessman. He was Marcus Williams, CEO of the airline she was flying on. And what the flight crew didn't know was that their mistreatment of this ordinary black child was about to cost them everything. The humiliation began at the VIP lounge and escalated on the plane when Victoria Harrington decided that Zoe's seat should be hers instead. Soon, Zoe's rightful place was stolen in plain sight, and she was removed from her first-class seat. If you stand against prejudice and believe everyone should be treated with respect, no matter their age, hit that subscribe button now and type justice in the comments. Then tell us where you're watching from, because this story has the best version of karma, discrimination, courage, and spectacular consequences. The black girl, Zoe Williams. At just 8 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone much older. Her braids were neatly tied with nice ribbons on her favorite color, and she clutched a well-worn copy of Hidden Figures that she had read for the 3rd time. Zoe wasn't just smart, she was exceptional. Math competitions, science Olympiads, and an IQ that would have impressed most adults. But that day, none of that mattered. That day she was just a black child in a space where some believed she didn't belong. Zoe was traveling alone from Atlanta, where she had been visiting her grandparents, to Chicago, where her father Marcus lived. But what most people didn't know, that Zoe had been taught never to announce, was that Marcus Williams wasn't just any father. He was the CEO of Skyline Airways, the very airline Zoe was flying on that day. A self-made man who had worked his way up from baggage handler to the boardroom over 20 years. Marcus could have arranged a private jet for his daughter. He could have had staff escort her through the airport. He could have made sure everyone knew exactly who she was. But Marcus Williams had built his success on a foundation of humility and resilience. You'll never understand the value of what you have if you don't experience life as everyone else does, he always told Zoe. So that day, she traveled as an unaccompanied minor with special assistance, but no special treatment. At the airport, Zoe followed the signs to the exclusive Skyline VIP lounge. Her unaccompanied minor status included lounge access, a detail clearly printed on her documents. As the heavy glass doors slid open, she stepped into a world of muted luxury. Soft leather chairs, complimentary refreshments, and the hushed conversations of business travelers. Zoe approached the reception desk, standing on tiptoes to make eye contact with Patricia, the lounge attendant. "Hello, I'm Zoe Williams. I'm traveling as an unaccompanied minor to Chicago," she said politely, sliding her documents across the marble counter. Patricia's eyes widened slightly. She looked at the papers, then at Zoe, then back at the papers. "Are you sure you're in the right place, sweetheart?" The endearment dripped with condescension. "The general waiting area is back that way." "I have lounge access," Zoe explained calmly, pointing to the relevant section on her documents. "It's included with my ticket." Patricia's perfectly manicured nails tapped against the counter. "Just one moment." She picked up the phone, turning slightly away from Zoe as if she shouldn't hear the conversation. "Yes, I have a situation at reception. A young girl claiming to have lounge access. Yes, unaccompanied minor. No first class. I know, that's what I thought too." Across the lounge, heads turned. A business executive in an expensive suit stared openly. A couple whispered behind their hands. Patricia hung up and scrutinized Zoe's documents once more, holding them up to the light as if checking for forgery. "Who purchased this ticket for you?" "My father," Zoe answered truthfully, but without elaboration. Marcus had taught her never to use his position for special treatment. After 3 more phone calls and nearly 15 minutes of standing at the counter, Patricia finally relented. "Fine. You can stay." She gestured vaguely toward a small table in the far corner, separated from the main seating area. "You can wait over there until your flight." Zoe's face betrayed nothing as she walked to the isolated table. Inside, her chest tightened with the familiar pain of exclusion, but she kept her father's words close. "Your dignity is not negotiable." She sat tall, opened her book, and began to read, ignoring the stares that followed her. 2 hours later, the boarding announcement came for Skyline Airways Flight 2275 to Chicago. Zoe gathered her belongings and walked toward the gate, Patricia's eyes following her every step. At the gate, the same story repeated itself. Despite being in the first boarding group, the gate agent stopped her. "Are you sure this is your flight, honey?" Again, that condescending sweetness. "Yes, I'm going to Chicago," Zoe responded, offering her boarding pass. The agent frowned. "And you're in first class?" The disbelief was unmistakable. "Yes. Seat 2A, Zoe confirmed, her voice steady even as her patience wore thin. This was the 3rd time she had been questioned since arriving at the airport. After another verification call, Zoe was finally allowed to board. She walked down the jet bridge, already exhausted from constantly having to justify her presence. Flight attendant Ashley greeted passengers at the door, her smile wide and welcoming, until she saw Zoe. "Do you need help finding your seat in the back?" Ashley asked, not even checking Zoe's boarding pass. "I'm in seat 2A, Zoe explained, offering her boarding pass yet again. Ashley's smile faltered. She looked at the boarding pass, then at Zoe, her expression a mixture of surprise and doubt. "Oh, right this way then." The first-class cabin was spacious and quiet. Zoe found her window seat easily and settled in, placing her backpack carefully under the seat in front of her. She arranged her book and tablet on the side table and buckled her seatbelt. Everything by the book, just as her father had taught her. "Always follow the rules," he'd say, "because they'll be looking for any reason to say you don't belong." As other first-class passengers boarded, Zoe felt their glances. Some double-took, others outright stared. She kept her eyes forward, her expression neutral. This wasn't new. This wasn't even surprising, but that didn't make it hurt any less. The boarding process continued smoothly until Victoria Harrington appeared at the entrance of the first-class cabin. At 45, Victoria represented old money and entitlement in its purest form. Her cream-colored Chanel suit was impeccable, her blonde hair styled in an elegant bob that likely cost more than most people's monthly rent. She clutched her designer handbag in one hand and her husband's arm with the other. Gregory Harrington, a tall man with silver hair and a permanently distracted expression, followed dutifully behind, thumbing through emails on his phone. Victoria paused at the entrance to first class, her eyes scanning the cabin like a general surveying a battlefield. When her gaze landed on Zoe, she froze. The girl sat quietly reading her book, completely unaware of the storm about to engulf her. Victoria's perfectly lined lips parted slightly in disbelief. "Gregory," she whispered, but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Look at that. Why is a child like that sitting in first class?" Gregory barely glanced up from his phone. Oh, I don't know, dear." Victoria didn't move. She stood blocking the aisle, causing a backup of passengers trying to board. "This is precisely why we should fly private. The standards have completely collapsed." She turned to her husband with theatrical distress. "And I specifically requested seat 2A. It has the best window view for taking off." Gregory sighed. "Your ticket says 4C, Victoria. I checked it myself." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "That's not acceptable. Not after the week I've had. She scanned the cabin again, her gaze hardening as it returned to Zoe. Wait here. Victoria moved purposefully toward Ashley, who stood arranging welcome champagne at the front galley. Ashley's professional smile brightened at Victoria's approach. She recognized the type of passenger who expected special treatment. Excuse me, Victoria said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. There seems to be a situation with the seating arrangements. Ashley leaned in. How can I help you, ma'am? Victoria's eyes darted toward Zoe, then back to Ashley. That child is sitting in seat 2A. I'm quite certain she doesn't belong there. She must have wandered up from economy. Ashley glanced over at Zoe, hesitation crossing her face. She did have a first-class boarding pass. Victoria's hand moved discreetly into her handbag. When it emerged, a folded $100 bill was pressed between her fingers. With the practiced smoothness of someone who had bought her way out of inconvenience many times before, Victoria pressed the bill into Ashley's hand during what appeared to be a simple handshake. I've had such a difficult trip, Victoria said, her voice dripping with manufactured distress. My husband's company is a major corporate client of this airline. Surely there's something you can do about this? Unusual situation? The money disappeared into Ashley's pocket, faster than professional ethics should have allowed. Her demeanor shifted immediately. Her allegiance purchased for the price of a moderately nice dinner. I completely understand your concern, Mrs. Harrington, Ashley said, her voice now carrying the crisp certainty of someone who had made a decision. Let me look into this right away. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding with that child's seating. Victoria returned to her husband with the satisfied smile of someone who had just successfully manipulated the system. She didn't bother to lower her voice now. That child obviously wandered up from economy. The flight attendant is going to sort it out. Her statement carried through the cabin. Several passengers looked up from their pre-flight routines, their attention drawn to Zoe. A balding man in 1C frowned. Children don't really belong in first class anyway. I paid for peace and quiet. A woman across the aisle nodded in agreement. It's becoming impossible to enjoy premium travel these days. Victoria seized the moment, building a coalition of disapproval. Exactly. And how did a child that age even get into first class without an adult? Something isn't right. The murmurs of agreement spread through the cabin like ripples in a pond. Only one passenger, an elderly black woman with elegant silver dreadlocks and kind eyes, watched the scene with growing concern. This was Mrs. Patterson, a retired civil rights attorney who had seen this script play out too many times in her 70 years. She said nothing yet, but she reached discreetly for her phone and began recording. Zoe, meanwhile, had become aware of the conversation. She tried to make herself smaller in her seat, hunching her shoulders and focusing intently on her book. But the words swam before her eyes as anxiety built in her chest. She had seen this happen before. Adults deciding she didn't belong somewhere without even speaking to her. Ashley approached with another flight attendant, Derek, a young man eager to please his senior colleague. Their expressions were professionally neutral, but their intentions were clear. Excuse me, sweetie, Ashley began, her voice honey-sweet but with a firm undertone. There seems to be some confusion with the seating arrangements. Can I see your boarding pass again? Zoe looked up, her expression carefully composed despite the anxiety churning inside her. She reached into her small backpack and produced the boarding pass, now slightly crumpled from repeated inspections. Here it is, seat 2A. Ashley studied it longer than necessary, as if staring at it might change what was clearly printed. Derek leaned over her shoulder, frowning exaggeratedly. That's strange, he murmured, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. How would a child have a first-class ticket by herself? Zoe's voice was steady but quiet. I'm an unaccompanied minor. My father purchased the ticket. All my paperwork is correct. Victoria interjected from across the aisle, not bothering to hide her disdain. Well, she must have found that boarding pass somewhere, or perhaps there was a printing error. Either way, she clearly doesn't belong here. Several passengers nodded in agreement. The mood in the cabin had shifted. A collective decision seemed to have been made about Zoe without any factual basis. It was the power of suggestion combined with deeply held biases that no one wanted to acknowledge. "Listen, sweetheart," Ashley continued, placing a hand on the back of Zoe's seat. "For everyone's comfort, we think it might be better if you move to another seat. There are plenty of nice seats in the back of the plane." Zoe's hands began to tremble slightly, but her voice remained steady, a testament to her father's coaching on maintaining dignity under pressure. "My ticket is for this seat. I've been assigned seat 2A. I don't understand the problem." Victoria sighed dramatically. "This is ridiculous. The flight is already delayed, and now this child is being difficult. Can't you just move her?" The balding man in 1C chimed in again. "Some parents these days have no consideration for other travelers. Sending a child to disrupt first class, it's inconsiderate." Zoe felt tears building behind her eyes, but she refused to cry. She remembered her father's words, "Never let them see they've wounded you." She took a deep breath and tried one more time. "My father paid for this seat. I have the right documentation. I don't want to move." Ashley's smile disappeared, her patience evaporating now that Zoe was becoming difficult. "I'm afraid this isn't optional. For the comfort of all our passengers, we need to find your proper seating assignment." Derek stepped forward, his hand extended for Zoe's backpack. "Let me help you with your things." Zoe looked around the cabin, searching for any ally, any face that might speak up for her. She found only averted gazes or outright hostile stares. Even Mrs. Patterson remained silent, though her eyes communicated a wordless apology as she continued filming discreetly. "This isn't right," Zoe whispered, but her protest was lost in the noise of boarding. Ashley's voice hardened. "We need to finish boarding. You'll need to come with us now so we can find your proper seat." The tears Zoe had been fighting finally spilled over. Silent tracks of moisture coursed down her cheeks as she gathered her book and tablet. She stood, her small frame dwarfed by the towering adults who had decided she didn't deserve to be there. Her movements were deliberate, dignified, even in defeat. She refused to rush despite the impatient gestures from Derek. As soon as Zoe vacated the seat, Victoria swooped in, settling into 2A with a triumphant smile. "Much better. This is exactly what I needed after such a stressful week." Gregory Harrington finally looked up from his phone, frowning slightly at his wife. "Victoria, wasn't your ticket for 4C?" She waved away his question. "It's handled, dear. The staff understood my needs." Derek led Zoe through the business class cabin and into economy. The contrast was stark, from spacious leather seats to tightly packed rows. He scanned the cabin and spotted a middle seat in row 32. Sandwiched between two strangers, a heavyset man already spilling into the adjoining space, and a woman engrossed in her laptop. "Here we go," Derek said with forced cheerfulness. "A perfect spot for you." Zoe said nothing as he stowed her backpack in the overhead bin, far enough away that she wouldn't be able to reach it herself. The message was clear. "You are small, you are powerless, you do not matter." She sat rigid in the middle seat, hands folded in her lap, tears now flowing freely but still completely silent. The man beside her glanced over with mild annoyance before returning to his football magazine. The woman on her other side didn't acknowledge her at all. Back in first class, Ashley served champagne to Victoria, who lounged comfortably in Zoe's rightful seat. "Thank you for understanding my situation," Victoria said with a wink, the unspoken acknowledgement of their transaction hanging between them. "Of course, Mrs. Harrington," Ashley responded with a conspiratorial smile. "We always try to accommodate our valued passengers." In economy class, Zoe stared straight ahead, her father's voice echoing in her mind. Your dignity is not negotiable. She may have lost her seat, but she refused to lose herself. With trembling hands, she reached for the seat back pocket and pulled out the safety card, pretending to read it while she gathered her courage to text a message to her father. Dad, I was denied my first-class seat, and it was given to a white passenger. What these flight attendants didn't know, what Victoria Harrington couldn't possibly imagine, was that sometimes the smallest person in the room held the greatest power. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly and wished you could intervene? What would you have done if you were on this flight? Share your thoughts in the comments below while we continue with how one little girl was about to turn this entire situation upside down. The aircraft door remained open, the departure time long since passed. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, checking watches and sighing dramatically. In economy, Zoe sat perfectly still, her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the seat in front of her. She had done all she could do. Now she waited. The first sign that something extraordinary was happening came when the jet bridge door suddenly reopened. A hush fell over the cabin as two individuals stepped aboard, neither wearing the standard Skyline Airways uniform. The woman wore a tailored navy suit with the airline's executive insignia, her expression grave and purposeful. Beside her walked the chief purser, the highest-ranking cabin crew member, his face a mask of professional concern. In first class, Victoria Harrington was midway through her second complimentary champagne. She gestured impatiently to Ashley, pointing at her empty glass. I think we've waited long enough. Either we need to depart, or you need to refresh my drink. Her voice carried through the quiet cabin, oblivious to the new tension building around her. Ashley's response died on her lips as she spotted the airline executive approaching. For the first time, fear flickered across her face. She knew this wasn't standard procedure. This wasn't a typical delay. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, the executive announced, her voice carrying throughout the cabin without the need for the PA system. I'm Sarah Donovan, Vice President of Customer Experience for Skyline Airways. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. Victoria rolled her eyes dramatically. Finally, someone with authority. Can you please tell the captain we need to depart? Some of us have important commitments in Chicago. Sarah Donovan didn't even glance at Victoria. Instead, she turned to the chief purser. James, please locate passenger Zoe Williams and escort her forward. Derek, standing near the galley, paled visibly. Ashley frantically straightened her uniform, attempting to project professionalism, but her hands trembled slightly as she collected Victoria's champagne glass. Back in economy, all heads turned as the chief purser made his way down the narrow aisle. He stopped at row 32, where Zoe still sat in silent dignity. Miss Williams? He asked, his voice gentle but carrying an unmistakable note of deference. Would you please come with me? Zoe looked up, her expression guarded. She had experienced too much that day to trust easily. Why? There's been a misunderstanding with your seating assignment. We'd like to rectify it immediately. The passengers in economy began to whisper. Many had witnessed Zoe's earlier humiliation, but said nothing. Now, they watched with growing interest as the chief purser personally escorted the small girl toward the front of the aircraft. As they passed through business class, passengers craned their necks to see what was happening. By the time they reached first class, the entire plane seemed to be holding its breath. Victoria Harrington, still ensconced in seat 2A, froze mid-complaint when she saw Zoe approaching with what appeared to be an executive escort. What's this all about? Victoria demanded, looking from Zoe to Sarah Donovan. We're already significantly delayed. Sarah ignored her, focusing entirely on Zoe. Miss Williams, I want to personally apologize for the treatment you've experienced today. Your correct seat assignment is indeed 2A, as your boarding pass indicates. Victoria sputtered, her face flushing. That's ridiculous. The flight attendant confirmed the child was in the wrong place. I have been seated here with the staff's full approval. Sarah Donovan turned to Victoria, her professional demeanor cooling several degrees. Mrs. Harrington, I'll need to see your boarding pass, please. This is outrageous, Victoria protested, but something in Sarah's expression made her reach for her handbag. She rifled through it, eventually producing her boarding pass with a triumphant flourish. There, seat 2A. Sarah examined the document and raised a single eyebrow. This is a business class boarding pass for seat 4C, Mrs. Harrington, not first class and certainly not seat 2A. The cabin fell completely silent. Victoria's face cycled through shock, embarrassment, and anger in rapid succession. There must be some mistake, that flight attendant assured me. That flight attendant was mistaken, Sarah interrupted firmly, and we'll be addressing that shortly. At that moment, the aircraft's PA system crackled to life. The captain's voice filled the cabin, but his usual pre-flight announcement was noticeably different. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. We have a rather unusual situation today. I've just received a direct call from Skyline Airways' Chief Executive Officer, who has requested to address the aircraft. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Executives never addressed passengers directly. This was unprecedented. The PA system crackled again, and a new voice emerged, deep, measured, and carrying unmistakable authority. Good afternoon. This is Marcus Williams, CEO of Skyline Airways. At the sound of her father's voice, Zoe's eyes widened. She stood a little straighter, but her expression remained carefully neutral. It has come to my attention that there has been a serious breach of our company's policies regarding passenger treatment on this flight. My daughter, Zoe Williams, was removed from her assigned first-class seat despite having valid documentation. She was then subjected to discriminatory treatment by crew members who accepted a bribe to reassign her seat to another passenger. Victoria Harrington's face drained of all color. Ashley, standing nearby, looked as though she might faint. Derek had disappeared entirely from view. Marcus continued, his voice remaining remarkably controlled despite the obvious anger beneath his words. At Skyline Airways, we have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. We also have a zero-tolerance policy for staff accepting payments or gifts in exchange for preferential treatment. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Even the ambient noise of the aircraft seemed to have dimmed in deference to Marcus Williams' voice. The crew members involved in this incident are being removed from their positions effective immediately. Mrs. Victoria Harrington, who offered the bribe and knowingly occupied a seat that was not assigned to her, will also be removed from this flight. Furthermore, Skyline Airways will be permanently suspending Mrs. Harrington's membership in our loyalty program, and she will no longer be welcome on our aircraft. Victoria jumped to her feet, her face contorted with indignation. This is preposterous. You can't do this to me. My husband's company spends thousands with your airline every month. As if in answer to her protest, 2 airport security officers appeared at the front of the cabin. Their timing was too perfect to be coincidental. This had been orchestrated down to the second. Mrs. Harrington, Sarah Donovan said calmly, please gather your belongings. These officers will escort you from the aircraft. Victoria looked around frantically, searching for support among the passengers who had so eagerly joined her coalition of disapproval earlier. Not a single person met her gaze. The balding man in 1C suddenly found his safety card fascinating. The woman who had agreed about premium travel standards stared fixedly out her window. Ashley, Derek, Victoria called out, as if they might somehow intervene on her behalf. But Ashley stood frozen, her career visibly crumbling before her eyes. Derek was nowhere to be seen, having retreated to the back galley at the first sign of trouble. Marcus Williams's voice returned, softer now. Zoe, I'm sorry this happened to you today. I hope this resolution provides some comfort. I'll see you when you land in Chicago, sweetheart. There was a momentary crack in his professional demeanor, just enough to reveal the father beneath the CEO. Then his voice returned to its official tenor. To all other passengers, I apologize for the delay. New crew members are already boarding, and you'll be on your way shortly. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for choosing Skyline Airways. The PA system clicked off, leaving a cabin full of shocked passengers in its wake. Victoria Harrington stood in the aisle. Security officers waiting patiently on either side. Her face had gone from pale to mottled red, her carefully cultivated image of sophistication shattered beyond repair. This is a mistake, she insisted, her voice rising to a pitch that made nearby passengers wince. Do you have any idea who my husband is? Sarah Donovan's response was calm but unyielding. Mrs. Harrington, we have security camera footage from the cabin showing you passing money to our flight attendant. We also have witness statements. She glanced meaningfully toward Mrs. Patterson, who still held her phone with its damning video evidence. Your options are to leave the aircraft voluntarily or be removed. But you will be leaving. Something in Sarah's tone finally penetrated Victoria's bubble of entitlement. With as much dignity as she could muster, which wasn't much, she collected her designer handbag and followed the security officers toward the exit. Ashley was next, escorted by another airline official who seemingly materialized from nowhere. Her uniform jacket was removed before she even reached the door, a public stripping of her position that spoke volumes. Derek was found hiding in the rear galley and marched forward, his face a mask of shame as he passed rows of staring passengers. As they exited, a new flight crew boarded, fresh-faced, professional, and clearly briefed on the situation. Their expressions were a mixture of determination and slight trepidation as they began their duties under the watchful eyes of a cabin full of passengers who had just witnessed corporate justice in action. The new purser approached Zoe, who still stood beside Sarah Donovan in the first-class cabin. Miss Williams, would you like to return to your seat now? Zoe nodded silently and took her rightful place in 2A. As she settled in, the passengers who had watched her humiliation earlier now witnessed her vindication. Some looked ashamed, others impressed, but all understood they had just witnessed something remarkable. Mrs. Patterson moved from her seat to the now vacant one beside Zoe. She reached over and gently patted the girl's hand. Your father would be proud of how you handled yourself today, she said quietly. You showed more dignity than all of them put together. A fresh glass of apple juice appeared before Zoe, served by a flight attendant whose smile contained not a trace of condescension. With our compliments, Miss Williams. Is there anything else you need before we depart? Zoe shook her head, finally allowing herself a small smile. No, thank you. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The new captain's voice came over the PA system, professional and warm. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our CEO Marcus Williams and the entire Skyline team, I'd like to apologize for the delay. We'll be departing for Chicago shortly. Current flight time is 2 hours and 15 minutes. The remaining first-class passengers, who had either participated in or silently enabled Zoe's mistreatment, now sat uncomfortably in their seats. The balding man from 1C made a point of leaning across the aisle. I'm sorry about earlier. I should have said something. Zoe regarded him thoughtfully. At 10 years old, she had just received a master class in power, prejudice, and privilege. She nodded politely but said nothing, her silence more eloquent than any response could be. As the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, nearly an hour behind schedule, not a single passenger complained about the delay. They had all learned a valuable lesson that day. Justice may sometimes be delayed, but in the right circumstances, it can be both swift and absolute. As Flight 2275 cruised at 36,000 feet somewhere over Indiana, a remarkable transformation had taken place. The tension that had filled the cabin had dissipated, replaced by a peculiar mix of reflection and humility. In Seat 2A, her rightful seat, Zoe Williams had finally allowed her shoulders to relax. The rigid posture of self-defense she had maintained since arriving at the airport gradually softened. For the first time that day, she looked like what she truly was, a 10-year-old girl. From her small purple backpack, Zoe retrieved a sketchbook and a set of colored pencils. Her hands moved across the page with quiet confidence, creating bold strokes of purples and blues. She was drawing what appeared to be a bird in flight, soaring above clouds that looked suspiciously like faces looking up from below. Art had always been Zoe's refuge, her father's encouragement giving her the freedom to express what words sometimes could not. Beside her sat Mrs. Patterson, the silver-haired woman who had documented the entire incident on her phone. She watched Zoe draw with appreciation in her eyes. "You have real talent," Mrs. Patterson observed softly. "The way you capture movement, that's not easy to do." Zoe looked up with a small smile. "Thank you. My dad says art helps us tell the truth about the world." Patterson nodded thoughtfully. "Your father sounds like a wise man, not just for running an airline, but for raising such a remarkable young woman." Across the aisle, the balding man who had so vocally supported Victoria Harrington's campaign shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had been stealing glances at Zoe for the past 20 minutes, working up the courage to speak. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he began, his voice uncharacteristically humble. "I want to apologize for my behavior earlier. I made assumptions that they were wrong, and I'm sorry." Zoe regarded him with eyes far older than her years. She didn't immediately respond, letting the moment stretch just long enough to make the man squirm. It wasn't vindictiveness. It was a lesson her father had taught her about allowing people to sit with their mistakes. "I accept your apology," she finally said, her voice clear and dignified. "Thank you for saying it." The man nodded, relief washing over his features. "Your father must be very proud of you." Zoe returned to her drawing, but a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Yes, he is." One by one, other first-class passengers found reasons to pass by Zoe's seat. A woman who had nodded along with Victoria's complaints now offered Zoe a magazine. "I thought you might like this. It has an article about young scientists." Another passenger happened to have an extra chocolate bar that he couldn't possibly eat. Each small offering was an unspoken apology, a recognition of collective failure to protect a child from injustice. Mrs. Patterson observed this parade of penance with knowing eyes. She leaned closer to Zoe. "You know why they're all doing this, don't you?" Zoe nodded without looking up from her drawing. "They feel bad because they didn't stand up for me before." "That's right. And do you know why they didn't stand up for you?" Zoe considered this question carefully. "Because it was easier not to, and because they didn't think I mattered." Mrs. Patterson sighed, the weight of decades of similar experiences evident in her voice. "When I was about your age, back in 1965, my mother took me into a department store in Birmingham, Alabama. I wanted to try on a hat, a pretty yellow one with a ribbon. The saleswoman said, 'Those aren't for you to touch.' My mother stood tall and said, 'My daughter's money is as good as anyone's.' She bought that hat, even though we really couldn't afford it." Zoe looked up, genuinely interested. "Did you wear it?" Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Every Sunday for a year. And every time I put it on, my mother would say, 'Remember, your dignity is not for sale.' Sounds like your father teaches you similar lessons." The flight attendant appeared with the beverage cart, offering drinks with a warm sincerity that stood in stark contrast to Ashley's performative politeness. As Zoe accepted another apple juice, her tablet chimed with an incoming video call. The screen showed Dad with a small airplane emoji beside his name. Zoe looked questioningly at the flight attendant, who nodded. "Special permission from the captain. Go ahead and take it." When Marcus Williams' face appeared on the screen, the resemblance to Zoe was immediately apparent. The same thoughtful eyes, the same quiet determination in their expressions. His voice was low but clear, even through the tablet speakers. "Hey Butterfly, how are you doing?" Zoe's composure finally cracked, just a little. Her bottom lip trembled slightly before she steadied it. "I'm okay now. I did what you always told me. I stayed calm and kept my dignity." Marcus's eyes shone with pride and a touch of lingering anger. "You did everything right, Zoe. Everything. I'm sorry you had to go through that." "Did you really fire those people, Dad?" Marcus nodded solemnly. "Yes. What they did violated everything our company stands for. Everything I've worked to build." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Sometimes leadership means making hard decisions. But this wasn't one of them. This was clear-cut. Zoe considered this, then asked the question that had been weighing on her. "Would you have done the same thing if I wasn't your daughter?" The question hung between them, profound in its simplicity. Marcus didn't answer immediately, understanding the importance of this moment. "I hope so," he finally said, his honesty palpable. "I've tried to build a company that would protect anyone in that situation. But the truth is, Zoe, it's easier to see injustice when it happens to someone you love. That's why I'm making changes." "What kind of changes?" Marcus' expression shifted to one of determination. "As we speak, our executives are developing a new training program. Every employee, from baggage handlers to pilots, will learn to recognize and prevent discrimination. And we're creating a new position, a passenger advocate, who will be available at every major airport to intervene in situations like yours." Zoe's eyes widened. "Because of what happened to me? Because of what happens to too many people every day. Your experience is going to make things better for others, Butterfly. That's how change happens. One incident, one person, one story at a time." As Marcus and Zoe continued their conversation, the PA system chimed. The captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Local time is 3:45 p.m. with clear skies and a temperature of 72 degrees. We'll be landing in approximately 20 minutes." Zoe said goodbye to her father, promising to see him soon. As she put away her tablet, Mrs. Patterson helped her organize her drawings. "You know," Mrs. Patterson said thoughtfully, "when I was practicing law, I handled discrimination cases. It took months, sometimes years, to see justice done. What happened today was extraordinary." Zoe looked out the window at the landscape below, the vast expanse of land giving way to the sprawling city of Chicago. "It shouldn't be extraordinary though, should it? It should just be normal." Mrs. Patterson smiled sadly. "You're right, and people like your father are trying to make it normal. That's why his position matters, why representation matters." The aircraft began its final approach, the gentle descent bringing them closer to Chicago with every passing moment. Flight attendants collected final items and prepared the cabin for landing. There was an atmosphere of unusual thoughtfulness throughout the first-class cabin, each passenger seemingly lost in their own reflections about what they had witnessed that day. When the plane finally touched down at O'Hare, the usual chaotic rush to stand and retrieve belongings was noticeably absent. Instead, passengers remained seated, allowing Zoe and Mrs. Patterson to exit first, a small gesture of respect that would have been unimaginable 2 hours earlier. As Zoe walked up the jet bridge, she spotted a tall figure waiting just beyond the gate area. Marcus Williams stood apart from the crowd, his commanding presence drawing glances from passing travelers. He wore no identification that marked him as the CEO of a major airline, just a simple suit and the watchful expression of a father waiting for his child. When Zoe saw him, her careful composure finally broke completely. She ran the last few steps, dropping her backpack as Marcus knelt to embrace her. For a moment there was no airline, no incident, no public spectacle, just a father holding his daughter close, his large hand cradling the back of her head as she buried her face in his shoulder. "I was scared," Zoe whispered, admitting what she couldn't show during the ordeal. "I know," Marcus replied softly. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right, even when you are scared. And you were so brave today, Butterfly." He stood, keeping one arm around Zoe's shoulders as they collected her backpack. Mrs. Patterson approached, extending her hand to Marcus. "Mr. Williams, I'm Eleanor Patterson. I witnessed what happened on the flight. Your daughter handled herself with remarkable grace." Marcus shook her hand warmly. "Thank you for being there for her, Mrs. Patterson. And thank you for documenting the incident. It will help ensure nothing like this happens again on my airline." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "I spent 40 years as a civil rights attorney. Old habits die hard." She turned to Zoe. "Remember what I told you about dignity? It's not just a word. It's a way of moving through the world." As Mrs. Patterson departed, Marcus and Zoe walked hand in hand through the terminal. "I have something to show you," Marcus said, guiding her toward a large video screen displaying flight information. But instead of departure times, the screen showed a new announcement. Skyline Airways announces the Dignity Initiative, a comprehensive program to eliminate discrimination and ensure all passengers are treated with respect, regardless of age, race, gender, or background. Zoe stared at the screen in amazement. "You did this today?" Marcus nodded. "The moment I hung up from our call. Sometimes, Butterfly, painful experiences can create powerful change. What happened to you was wrong, but it's going to help thousands of other people have a different experience." 6 weeks later, Zoe stood before her 5th grade class at Lincoln Elementary School in Chicago. It was career day, and students were sharing presentations about their parents' professions. Most had brought in simple items: a firefighter's helmet, a stethoscope, a chef's whisk. Zoe had brought something less tangible, but far more powerful. A story. "My father runs an airline," she began, her voice clear and confident. "But today, I'm not going to talk about planes or how they fly. I'm going to talk about something more important. How to stand up for yourself when the world tries to tell you that you don't belong." Her classmates listened with rapt attention as Zoe recounted her experience. Her teacher, Miss Abernathy, watched with glistening eyes as this remarkable 10-year-old articulated lessons that many adults never learn. "The most important thing my father taught me," Zoe concluded, holding up a drawing of herself sitting proudly in seat 2A, "is that your dignity is not negotiable. It doesn't matter how old you are, what you look like, or where you come from. You deserve respect, and sometimes you have to be brave enough to demand it." As her classmates applauded enthusiastically, the camera panned back to reveal Marcus standing at the back of the classroom, watching his daughter with unmistakable pride. In this moment, in this ordinary classroom, on an ordinary Wednesday, something extraordinary was happening. A new generation was learning what justice looked like, what courage sounded like, and what dignity felt like, all through the story of an 8-year-old girl who had refused to give up her seat. If you enjoyed this story, hit the subscribe button and share with others. See you in our next video.